Thank you.
So what's John Boehner up to? I'm having a hard time. He caved on the debt ceiling, realized he couldn't get his Republicans to agree to something that didn't have an attachment to it, so he just threw it on the floor, voted for it, said, we're going to be done with it. Sounds to me a little bit like, 2014 is a mid-year and we don't want to have another slam against the Republican Party.
Right. I mean, the other side of it, instead of caving, is that he had a good week through the help of Democrats by not skipping out on the check, which was what his caucus wanted to do. So, which is why he seemed cheerful as he left that press conference, singing even. I don't know if voters now are going to notice that the debt limit was raised. If a debt limit is raised in the woods, does anybody notice? I mean, I think people notice the conflict more than they notice the smoothness. But if you had told me last fall that we'd be here and we wouldn't have this showdown, I would have said, forget it. There's no way we don't have a showdown. Because I would have said last fall, absolutely, because the fall was so brutal for Republicans.
Yeah, well, let me agree with my Democrat friend that John Boehner did have a good week. It was the hard part was getting there. This is something that I think John has really it's been a process getting to this point, working with the particular conference that he has. But I think he's trying to get his members to fight the smart fights. And the smart fight right now is making this an election, this 2014 campaign, about the contrast between Republicans and Democrats on Obamacare. And now that we've moved past this and we don't have the prospect of a congressional showdown over something like the debt ceiling, he's in a much better place, and so is the conference.
Well, there's really no tangible contrast between Democrats and Republicans on Obamacare as far as the policy, because the Republicans haven't put forth a significant set of policies to fix Obamacare just yet. The key is with Boehner and the Republicans, they know from last fall how bad they looked in the polls coming off of that debt fight and the government shutdown, and they knew they couldn't repeat it. They know that everything rests on their ability to...
Still didn't vote for it. I mean, you still had the caucus saying, no, we want to do that again. I mean, to say that, well, they've learned their lesson, and they said, well,
Boehner did. I mean, it's a leadership thing, right?
It was politics 101. Boehner said, I'm not going to go down with this small Tea Party minority in my caucus just to lead us to another government shutdown. I'm not going to do it in a midterm election year. We have good enough numbers of doubt and questions among the electorate around Obamacare. So we're going to campaign on that. They're not going to touch this issue, and we've seen it, just like they're not going to touch
until
even
they're primaried by
now.
folks.
Well, except for, it is true that it allowed most of his caucus to vote against the debt ceiling. They can go home and say, I voted against it. And there was no big fight. Let me move you to the Senate side, where we had something similar, where in order to avoid a Ted Cruz filibuster, Republicans had to vote with Democrats to get past the filibuster and get to the vote. Mitch McConnell is in what may be a tough race. It's not altogether clear to me how tough the primary is going to be, or for that matter, the general. But has he been genuinely hurt, do you think, by what he had to do, which is he had to vote for moving on?
Right. He said, I have to protect the country and do my job, and that means shutting down a faction in his party, a vocal faction in his party, and again, allowing Democrats to vote the way they did. But, I think... Look, Mitch McConnell is going to be seen as a political operator regardless of this. This was true before that vote. It's going to be true after the vote. This is just another piece of evidence. But I think a lot of this is already baked in the cake for primary voters, and we'll see if Matt Bevin, his primary challenger, can use that to his advantage or not.
So less about conservative versus really conservative and more about inside Washington, outside Washington.
Yeah, and I think back in Kentucky, Mitch McConnell isn't in any worse off place than he was before this vote. I mean, he has had votes for raising the debt limit before that if conservatives back there who didn't like him wanted to use it against him, they could. But I talked to one really smart reporter up on Capitol Hill who covers the Senate and said, look, this was one of those cases where we skipped to the last chapter. We ultimately knew that this was going to have to happen on the Senate side, and it did. And I think Mitch McConnell will take a little bit of a hit on the early side, but he'll still be in a much stronger position because we'll have the debt ceiling showdown off the table.